Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Christine. I'm with Seedman Development, and I am joined today by my colleague Kimberly, as well as Ronald Pruitt from 4AGoodCause. And we are excited to share with you how Importacular helps you work with 4AGoodCause data in order to integrate that into Razor's Edge. Just a few housekeeping things to let you know. We do have a chat box that's going to be enabled. My colleague Kimberly is going to respond to questions there. If there are questions that she feels would be helpful for everyone, we will have a time at the end where she's going to ask those questions. So please do type your questions in there. She'll answer them as we go. She also, we'll have that time at the end, like I said. Today's session is being recorded. I'm very happy to send copies of the recording to you afterwards if that's something that you would like. And if you have any other questions, pricing or anything like that, happy to send that after as well. I do believe I've sent it to most everyone who's registered, but if you've slipped in at the last minute, happy to catch up on that. And I think with that, we are ready. Ronald, when you're ready, I'd like to give you a chance to kind of tell us about 4AGoodCause. I'm going to pull up your slides here.
Perfect. Can you hear me? Everybody hear me?
Can hear you perfectly.
Wonderful, wonderful. I really appreciate you guys doing this today. Hi everybody. Thanks for attending. I'm Ronald Pruitt. I'm the president and founder of 4AGoodCause. I've been helping nonprofits raise money online for over 2 decades now. The software 4AGoodCause, our product, is an easy-to-use, effective, and affordable fundraising platform for nonprofits. And you can run virtually any type of online fundraising campaign through 4AGoodCause, from donations to events to crowdfunding to peer-to-peer campaigns. We really love Seedman Development, and we love our integration with their Importacular product. Because a lot of nonprofits that use Razor's Edge are looking for a more easy to use and affordable solution for their online fundraising rather than the Razor's Edge suite of tools. But a lot of times they're worried about how they're going to get that data out of our platform and back into Razor's Edge. That's what the Importacular product does for our clients that use Razor's Edge. It just makes that process easy so they can use a better suite of online fundraising tools like ours, but keep Razor's Edge and just make that integration as easy as possible. So I'm really excited for the Seedman team here to show you guys how it works. Next slide, if you don't mind. And for those that are not familiar with 4AGoodCause, perhaps you're looking for an alternative to the Razor's Edge suite of fundraising tools, looking for something that's more affordable and easy. You can find us here at 4AGoodCause.com. You can schedule a demo with me for me to have you show us around, or you can reach out to me here, info@4AGoodCause.com, or just give us a call. I'll be glad to chat with you. Again, look forward to seeing this in action today, and really excited to have you see it, and our appreciation to Christine and Kimberly for showing this off to you guys today. We love this integration. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you guys.
Great. Thank you so much, Ronald. And I'm going to go ahead and close that. And I'm going to pull up my screen share. So bear with me just a second while I get my screen ready to go. So you can see now I am in the Razor's Edge. I have come to my plugins tab, and I have opened Importacular. So we're going to go ahead and get started here with my 4AGoodCause data source. So if you're working with 4AGoodCause or any of the others, you can always move these around. So if that's gotten down to the bottom and you need to move it up to the top, of course you can do that. So I'm going to click on my 4AGoodCause, and I'm going to click on Start. The 4AGoodCause integration doesn't require you to pull a spreadsheet, because we can access this information directly from the software. And you can see here on my data source screen, I have the option to choose between donations and orders. And then I have the option of entry dates, or import the entries from and import entries to. So what this does is the from is going to default to the last time that you opened the product. The to is going to default to when we've opened the product now. So in order for me to have some sample data for you to see, I'm going to back this up just a couple years. And I'm going to leave that there. So you can always change it, but just so you know, that from and to helps you avoid duplicating entries. We're going to work with our donations for right now. Of course, the orders are going to bring in some different information. So if you're working with this product and you have donations as well as orders, you would need to pull those separately. But for today, we're just going to look at those donations. I'm going to click OK. It's going to download that data. And once it's done, we'll be able to see how many records we're working with. And we'll have a chance to work with an existing template or build a new one. So what's happened here, as we can see, we are in our data source of For a Good Cause. We also have 24 sample gifts here that we're going to review. I can choose a template. So I have a drop down here. I've got a couple of For a Good Cause templates. I have one for my donations and one for my orders. You can absolutely have more than that. That's just what I have here. Or I could build a whole new template if I click on this green circle with the white plus sign. For the purpose of what we're doing today, I want to walk you through a template I've already set up. So I'm going to select my template and I'm going to click on the pencil here, which is how we would edit our template, which is also how we can open it and review what we have. So we're going to click there and that's going to pull up our template. Now, within Importacular, because we have a free version of the product as well as optional paid add-ons, everyone who opens Importacular has access to the constituent tab, the address tab, and the gift tab. The other tabs are all available for purchase. If you are working with that area, you may need to do that, but you can work with those 3 tabs at any level. So I'm going to mainly focus on those, but I may show you a couple things that do work with the other areas. When you first open your template, you always have to start with the constituent. So you can see here right now that constituent box is grayed out, and that's because once you've mapped your constituent, you can't map it again. But once you've mapped that constituent, it unlocks everything else. So let's start with reviewing our constituent so you can get a sense of how this flows. When we open our constituent, let's just make that a bit wider because it makes it easier to read. We can see that we have 5 different columns here. The very far left is our required column, and it's going to show the fields that are required by Blackbaud and the fields that are required by your organization. So you can see right there, the first name field has a green circle with a check mark in it. That means that the first name field is required in my version of Razor's Edge. It's not required for everybody, but it is required for me. That second column are my names of my Razor's Edge fields, and these are primarily in alphabetical order, so you can find them easily that way. And they're limited to this area. So these are going to be primarily that bio 1 and bio 2. So if we scroll through here, you can see first name, last name, maiden name, primary address C, some of those things that we would associate with that initial creation of a constituent. Our middle column is our source field name. And our source field is going to be data that we pulled directly out of For a Good Cause. So you can see in the first name, I have selected a first name. For the row for that first name field in Razor's Edge, we've selected first name. That's one of my options in the data coming directly out of For a Good Cause. And I want to put it in the first name field in Razor's Edge because that's where that would go. The fourth column here, sorry, getting ahead of myself with the word last. The fourth column is the default value. The default value allows me to assign things to these records in Razor's Edge that may not be in For a Good Cause. So a really good example of that is working with primary addressee and salutation. So for example, here I've chosen formulas in Razor's Edge for my primary addressee and salutation. Those formulas are not going to exist in For a Good Cause because the template numbers and all of those IDs are unique to Razor's Edge. But if I want to assign them to someone as I'm importing them, I can add them as a default value, and that will assign that code to these records as we're entering or updating these constituents in Razor's Edge. Last but not least, we have a column for settings. And at this level, these are called field settings because they work specifically with each of the fields for these rows. So for example, right now on my screen, you can see that primary addressee. So that's a field in Razor's Edge. You can see that I've assigned a default value of William Smith. Now, if I have major gift officers who are really diligent with working with their addressees and salutations, I don't want to override their good work to list titles and spouses and preferred names and all of that with this generic formula. So what I can do is use my field settings to say, only add this value to new constituents. I don't want to change an existing constituent. I just want to update a new constituent. So that's one example of how we could work with those field settings. If I scroll up a little bit and go back to the last name, you can see another example of that is I could also say, make it proper case. So if people are typing in all lowercase or all uppercase and I want it to be fixed to proper case, I can use the field setting to make that change in this layer, in this option. So these are field by field. So the casing, you would have to do that on every field that you want to change casing on. Updating new and or existing, you do need to do that field by field, but you have a lot of options here to get that data exactly how you want it and to avoid changing data that you don't want to change. Go ahead and save that. And let's go ahead and keep looking at our other areas. So I'm going to go ahead. Oops, I didn't map an ID there. So it's we've got an ID as a required field. I'm going to go ahead and just add that there, but I definitely don't want to change that on anybody. So we're just going to leave that for right now. So go ahead and save that mapping. So a couple of other things here that you can see. I have a constituent code, so just pull that up for you. And I've defaulted that to friends. If I had something in my source field that told me what constituent code, I could map that as well. Let's go ahead and make a new mapping. So let's add a constituent attribute so you can see how that happens. And I'm going to add this and link it to my constituent. We'll get to why there's a drop down there in just a minute. And let's go ahead and let's add this as an attribute for a club involvement. So we've got our default value, that's our attribute category. And I want to add the date from their transaction date. So let's go ahead and add that from our 4AGoodCause data. And then we would need to decide if our club information is something coming out of 4AGoodCause or if it's something we're going to assign to everyone. So let's go ahead and take a quick look here. And I don't think we have anything here that would make sense for a club involvement. So let's just go ahead and arbitrarily say that all of these people are interested in football. So we can go ahead and save and close that mapping. So that's how we would go about adding these mappings and adding those records so we can get that attribute added to those constituents as they come into Razor's Edge. One piece I want to mention though, if you notice, we have settings at this layer as well. So when we were on that constituent mapping and I showed you how we could choose to just update that field with the casing or with new or existing constituents, here we have layers of data that we can work with for a whole mapping. So that attribute is a great place to explain that. So you can see again, on our attribute, we have a club involvement, we have a date, and we have a description. So we've got 3 different fields there. Now let's say, for example, that club involvement is a big deal in our organization, and we don't want to change it if it's already on someone's record. What we can do is work with what's called an area setting. So this looks similar to a field setting, but it works with the whole area mapping instead of just a field. When I click on that for the attribute, you can see here I've got a couple of options. I can override a match for allow one per record. So that's depending on your attribute, how it's set up, if you're allowed to have more than one attribute of the same thing. If you have matching attributes, so you can determine what counts as a match using this middle section. And then once you determine what counts as a match, you can determine what happens. So just to kind of explain that a little bit more. Right now, this is set to match on the attribute category and the attribute description. So the category is always a match criteria. It's not an option to uncheck it here. So that category, for example, in this case is club involvement. So right now, for an attribute to be counted as a matching attribute, it has to have the same category and the same description. If it has the same category and description, then we need to decide what we want it to do. Do we want it to always add a new attribute? Do we want it to add a new attribute only when there's no existing, but update the existing? So what that would mean is in this case, it's going to change that date on the attribute. Or do we want it to say, do not add new attribute when existing match found? So say it has the same category, it has the same description, don't change Razor's Edge. So that's what that third option does. The last section is coming soon to Importacular version 4.9, which we anticipate coming soon this month, is the option to say, I only want to add the attribute, add or update the attribute if the record is new or if the record is existing. So in this case, this is a constituent attribute. So if I only want this attribute on new constituents, I would just uncheck the box for existing. If I only want it on existing, I would uncheck the box for new. So you have a lot of options here to help you make sure you add this data exactly how you want it in Razor's Edge and minimize your cleanup, minimize duplication, not just of constituents, but also of things like an attribute. So I'm going to go ahead and just cancel this, and we're going to keep going and looking at this template. So let's move to our address tab. So you can see on our address tab, we do have email addresses and phone numbers, just kind of keeping in line with what Blackbaud does with those fields. But let's open our address mapping so you can see how that can look. So again, I'm going to make that just a bit wider for you. So we have the option here. We've got our address fields coming straight out of For a Good Cause. We've got city, and then on our country, we do have a setting. So let's open that so you can see kind of an option. So what I've done here is in For a Good Cause, the country code was US. In my version of Razor's Edge, the country code is United States. So I've done a data transformation here so that the data from For a Good Cause is going to come into Razor's Edge the way that I have my Razor's Edge standard set up. So it allows me to do a dynamic transformation to keep my data clean. I also can work with my code table entries, so I can tell it to ignore something that's not in my code tables. I could add new code table entries. A lot of different options there of things that we can do with this data as we're bringing it into Razor's Edge to keep our data clean. Go ahead and save that. We can keep coming down here. So we have the option here too of working with our postcodes. So a field I do like to show people is we can assume this is a US code. If there's only 4 digits, put a 0 in front of it. So for people on the East Coast especially, that's a very helpful field to know. Once we have this mapped and we have our address all set up like we do here, we have a couple of options for the whole address. So again, just that area setting of working with the whole thing. So something people frequently ask me is, how do I avoid adding an address to Razor's Edge that's already in Razor's Edge? And the answer to that is use your area settings. So right now I've pulled up my address area settings, and you can see in the middle here, I have duplicate address match settings. This is what allows you to determine what is a match between Razor's Edge and your spreadsheet. So right now I have my match settings set to address line 1, address line equivalents, and postcode. Recommendations for this obviously are going to differ based on the organization, based on what your addresses are, and really based on where you're located. For organizations in Canada and in the UK, postcode is sufficient as an address match because postcode is really specific, like to a block even. Whereas in the US, postcode is really broad and it's not a very good qualifier by itself. Some organizations may want to work with the city. I generally don't, but part of that is because I've lived in too many places where you have small municipal townships that get absorbed by the larger city and can be interchangeable when people write out their addresses. So I tend to work with address line 1 and postcode. Of course, you need to do what works for you. Those address line equivalents, though, that is things like street and ST, avenue and AV, boulevard and BLVD. You can add equivalents to the table. You can change that at any time. So if you have something that you're seeing that needs to be linked together, that's always customizable. The thing that these cannot match to are when people have typos, if they spell their street name wrong, things like that, it won't catch. But this will catch the vast majority of duplicate addresses, so long as the settings work with how your data is structured. So then the next piece to this is, what do you want to happen when there is a match? Do you want it to add new addresses only when there's no match, but update the addresses if there is a match? Do you want it to ignore it when there's a match? Do you want to always update a preferred address? Do you want to always add a new address, whether or not there's a match? So you have 4 different choices here. You can do whatever makes the most sense for your data policies. At the bottom, you can see the option here to back up preferred addresses. So if you have set these addresses to be preferred and you have existing constituents and you want to maintain that address history of what their last address was, you can easily use this section in order to make sure you don't lose historical information. Our second tab here allows us to work with avoiding blank addresses. This works for existing constituents, as well as if you have one of the relationship destinations, do you want to update relationship addresses or do you want to update constituent addresses? So this is only available with those destinations. It's not available for free users, but it is here if you have those destinations. And right now, before I forget, just want to point out this blue circle with the question mark that you see at the top of every screen takes you directly to the user guide for that area. So if I were to click on it now, it's going to take me to address area settings. If I click on it from another screen, it will take you to the user guide for that screen. So easy way to get help on the fly, take you directly where you need to go. So you can see here, we also have the phone number and the email address. Let's go ahead and open our email address. And so you can see our different fields. One thing to highlight that's different between Importacular and Razor's Edge Import is you can add that do not contact field to a phone number. So if you have something in the way that you've set this up where you know that someone doesn't want email, you can always add that. We can add our phone number, so our email address, and then we have our phone type. One other piece that is new in 4.9, so I like to show you that today, is you have the option now to add a hierarchy. So for example, I had that mapped to the phone type of email, but if I already have an email address labeled as email, and my business rules don't allow me to have 2 email addresses labeled as email, this addition of the hierarchy is going to allow me to go to the next type. So if I already have an email, this email address is going to come in as email too. So you have the option here to make that change, keep your data exactly how you want it, and avoid and satisfy that business rule. The matching here is really similar to matching we've looked at. You can choose if you want to match on the phone type or the phone number. My personal preference is matching on that phone number. When I've managed data, it usually mattered more if I had the same email address listed twice rather than if I had the type listed twice. I recognize you may have a different reason, but that's my rationale. And again, what do we want to do when it matches? Do we want to add it anyway? Do we want to update what's in Razor's Edge, or do we want to ignore it? So a lot of different options within that, again, to help keep from adding a duplicate email address or a duplicate phone number as you're using this tool. So I'm going to come over now and let's take a quick look at our gift. So obviously we're working with donation information, so the gift here is really important. So again, we have that same kind of a format here with our template, and we have the option here to work with our data. So I've selected my total from this field. We can work with any of the data in this drop down. So for me, the total was the one that made the most sense. I do know that you have a couple of other options there. So if you needed to, you can work with those as well. And then I've gone ahead and filled in my fields. So I've got my transaction. I can work with either a field in my source field, or I can click on the side. So if I wanted to add an appeal to these, I can always click here, find now, let's just add email appeal. But you can see here too, I've worked with my fund, I've linked it to the campaign name, and then I can match what's in those campaign names to what I want it to go to in Razor's Edge. So I've got a really simple one here. I'm defaulting everything to my annual fund, but I could also add some different transformations so that specific campaign names from 4AGoodCause go to specific funds in Razor's Edge. So a lot you can do there with those data transformations. We've satisfied our different requirements. So I've got a transaction date, I've got my post status, I've got my pay method, I do have my receipt amount. And then I have, for my type, I worked with the frequency field so that I could make them all cash. But if you have some that should be cash and some that should be recurring gifts, that frequency gives you the option to separate those out. If you are working with recurring gifts and you need the scheduling, you can change your common fields to common fields in scheduling. And that gives you the option to work with the schedule wizard. And it gives you the option to set up a schedule. So you can add that first pay. You can add the frequency, you can add the number of frequencies. So you can map those using your data, or you can map those using a schedule wizard that allows you to just set a default. Go ahead. So once you've mapped your gift, then you have the option to add the different fields on the side. Many of these are available to all users: gift attribute, gift notepad, split gift, gift benefits. Several of them are available in paid options. So soft credits, solicitor tribute, and adjustment are all part of paid areas, but the gifts themselves are free. So you can see I did actually set up a tribute so that you can see how that looks. I do have an option on my tribute tab to set up a tribute account. I've mapped a tribute there, and I've got an acknowledgement. So those are all pieces I've added to this just so you can get a sense of how that data would pull together in order to allow users to add not only the constituent and the gift, but also that tribute information as we go. So let's just take a quick look at that. I've got the tribute account that does look very much like our constituent mapping that we did in the beginning, but instead of first name, I have tribute first name. And instead of last name, I do have tribute last name. I've also got tribute acknowledgement, and I have my tribute itself here that I've added that tribute type. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close that. And when you come back over to the gift, you can see that I have linked that tribute to that gift. So that way, when we go ahead and add this, we will get that tribute and the gift linked together. So when it imports into the batch, they're already linked and we don't have to do anything with that. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. And let's go ahead, and I want to show you our criteria set so you have a sense of where we would see how the data matches to Razor's Edge. And then I want to show you how the review process works. So let's go ahead and open our criteria sets here. We have 4 different criteria sets, and these are how Importacular matches 4AGoodCause data over to Razor's Edge. So let's open that individual constituent set. So this is how the individual records are matched to what's in Razor's Edge, which I believe most of our data in our sample is coming from individuals. So it's going to start at the top and it's going to work its way down to look to see which record has a match. So the higher up matches are the more accurate matches. We have our exact for the top 2. So we have a constituent ID. If the same constituent ID exists in both systems, that's an exact match. And that's going to mark the record to update in Razor's Edge. So if we have the same constituent ID, if we have the same first name and email address, so that's our second row. If we hit our third row and we have the same first name, last name, address, 1, and zip code, that's a good match. And a good match will also mark it as update. But we can see in the review screen that it's a good match. So we know that it's not one of our top tier, but it is a good match. We have our fourth row, which is first name and equivalence, last name. And again, that's a good match. And then finally, we have our last row. And this is a poor match. And that's just first name and equivalence, last name and zip code. And poor match means that we're going to get the word decide in our review screen, which we're going to see the review screen in just a minute. And that decide will mean that we have to look at this and make sure it's the right person. So you have a chance to review. So these are completely customizable. These are things that I have set up. You do have a defaults that come into your system, but you can always change these. So just so you can see how that looks, I'm going to go ahead and open my row 4. And you can see that I have the option here to work with my address lines, my address equivalents, my first name, my last name. I can work with adding different fields here or taking fields away. But keep in mind, these are things you want to group together to see if they all match. So right now, I have to have the same first name or first name equivalent, the same last name, the same address lines or address line equivalents, and the same zip code in order for this to match a constituent to Razor's Edge. If I add more fields to this, that's going to make the match harder, which might be what I want. If I take fields away, it's going to make the match easier. Again, might be what I want. It depends on what you want. So if you're reviewing your matches and they don't look like you want them to, you can always come back and change these so that you get different matches. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. And I'm going to save my set since we've reviewed that. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to save and close. And we're going to move on to looking at our review screen. So in order to do that, we do need to assign a control report. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I definitely recommend that you create a new control report every time you use the tool and every time you do the process. I also personally recommend that you date it and give yourself a note so you remember what date it is. That's just something I find helpful. And then I do want to point out here that you can only process the first number of rows. We've only got 24 rows right now, so it's not a huge file. But if you're working with a lot of records in For a Good Cause, if you have a giving day that's a smashing success and you want to test this on, say, 1 or 2 rows rather than 200, that's what this is good for. Just check the box, tell it how many rows to check. The other thing is that you can create queries of everyone you've updated and added. And you can work with exceptions. So that's if the record already exists in Razor's Edge and there's an exception, you can create a static query of that as well. Just easy ways for you to find that data again. I'm going to click continue so we can match that data to what's in Razor's Edge. And we can see here, we've got our data here for us to review. Let's go ahead and just pull that out just a little bit so you can see it a little bit bigger. So you can see we've got a mix here of records that are being marked update and create. Again, update means that it's already found a record in Razor's Edge that looks like what we have. And create means that we don't have a record in Razor's Edge. So create means that there's a poor match and Importacular is thinking that we need to create that record. So if we scroll over here to the right, we can see we've got exact match on that first row. We've got no match on the second row. Exact, we've got quite a few different options here. Grid match here is because we have 2 records here for Dick Grayson, and Importacular is acknowledging that it's the same name, it's the same address, it's the same email address. So this is the same person. So we want to create one record and add both gifts to that same record. So we're going to avoid adding Dick Grayson twice. We're going to add him one time, and we're going to use this as a way to link those together. So that's what this little link means. It's a grid match. So let's go ahead and filter our options so you can see how that works. Let's see if we have any decides we need to review. So we don't have any decides. That means we didn't have any poor matches. Let's go ahead and take a quick look and see how many we have as creates. So we have 11 creates. Helpful way to be able to see that. And let's go ahead and take a look at how many updates we have. So we have 13 updates. Now, if we wanted to do any filtering, we can do that. So if we wanted to make all of the creates ignores, I could click here and then I could click here and mark all of them ignore. So a lot of different options that I can work with there. The filtering helps you, especially with decides, so that you can review them all separately. We also have the option to dig into this data a little bit more on this tab. So I can come here, I can see these different rows, I can see my constituent, I can see my attribute, I can see my constituent code. I can come over here, I can look at my addresses, I can look at my tribute addresses. It looks like maybe I've got to need to look at that field. I can see my phone number, I can see my email address. So when I look at this address line 1, it makes me wonder if there's something I need to go back and take a quick look at. So let's go ahead and go back to our template. Let's check that address line and make sure it's mapped the way we wanted it to be. All right, let's go ahead and save and close that. We'll check that again. So that review screen is a quick way for you to be able to review that data, make sure everything is coming through exactly how you want it to be. You can review yourself. So we've got those addresses showing up here. We've got phone numbers. We can look at our gifts so we can see what gift information. We can make sure that we've mapped things to the correct field. So if for some reason you accidentally had a slip of the mouse and the record isn't going where you need it to go, we can always resolve that by going back and changing our template. We can see our tribute records here, and we can even see if they're matched to something already in Razor's Edge. So these are actually updating to themselves a little bit there. It looks like we've got Clark Kent being marked as his own tribute. But we've got a bunch of different options there that we can work with. So once we've worked with all of our different options, we can validate that data before we put it in. And we can see if we have, oh, we do have a decide now. Let's go ahead and find our decide. We have a decide, must be on our tribute tab. We do have some decides here. So we've got decides here that we can work with and we can update and change. That way we can avoid creating records or adding records that we don't want. So let's change Bruce Wayne to create. Donna Troy doesn't look like she's there. Let's go ahead and change her to create as well. So we can see down here the records that Importacular thought were a match. We could also find a match by clicking find in Razor's Edge. So if you know a name and you don't see the answer, you don't see them there, you can do that. We can, let's go ahead and just going to mark him here so we can get that. So then we can go ahead and we can validate our data and we can look to see if we have our data set up correctly or if we have exceptions. So I do have some exceptions today. So let's go ahead and let's take a quick look at that control report so we can see what may have happened. So when we open our control report, we can click on our exceptions tab and you can see right now I'm in version 4.9, as I said. So my exception column is in column B. If you are in version 4.8 or earlier, your exception column is going to be at the far end of your report. So you would have to go there. So it looks like we've got the required field missing of the ID. And I think that's because I had some testing in this instance just a little bit ago. So I'm going to save my review session. So we save all of those changes that I made. And I'm going to go back to my configuration and I'm going to undo my testing that I did right before this webinar. Sorry about that. Go to my fields here. And I'm going to go ahead and uncheck that for right now. And that way we can validate this again. Sorry about that. You can see a quick way to resolve something as we go. So in order to re-access my data that I was working with, I'm going to click back on For a Good Cause. And I'm going to select my date range that I had earlier. And I would need to know my time. So we may have to rematch those just because I did not pay attention to my time there. I'm going to just select my template and I'm going to just select my control report. We're going to go ahead and map that. We are going to save our review set. We did get our review session back. There we go. And let's go ahead and validate again. And that did fix that for most of our people. We still have a couple that we do want to review and see what's going on there. So at this point, I do want to stop here and see what questions we have. Kimberly, do you have anything for us that we can resolve for everybody?
I don't think so. We had some, Ron had some questions about what training we offer, but I've addressed those in the chat. So hopefully everybody's got the details they needed. So thanks ever so much for showing us that. I think it was really comprehensive.
Okay, good. Well, I'm happy to stay for a couple more minutes. So if you have a question that you haven't typed in the box yet and you want to type that in, I know I covered a lot of ground and I went pretty quickly just to try and give you an overview of this. But there's also I'm sure there's lots of nuance and things that people may have questions about. So please type it in.